Welcome aboard the Bedtime Express, where dreams begin and restful sleep awaits. I'm your narrator for tonight's journey, and I'm delighted to guide you through an enchanting tale designed especially for grown-ups seeking peaceful slumber. Our journey is about to start in a minute. Tonight, we'll sail across the wine-dark sea with Jason and his band of legendary heroes as they embark on the greatest quest of ancient times, the search for the Golden Fleece. This is a story of courage and love, of mystical islands and divine challenges, told with gentle pacing and dreamy narration to help you drift into the most restful sleep. Before you fall asleep, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment about what you like to have as your next bedtime story, and subscribe to join our growing community of peaceful dreamers. Your support helps us create more magical voyages to the land of dreams. Now, find your most comfortable position, close your eyes, and let your breathing slow and deepen. Allow the gentle sounds of my voice to wash over you like waves upon a distant shore. Release the tensions of your day and prepare to embark on an adventure that will carry you safely into the realm of restful sleep. So settle in, dear travelers, as the Bedtime Express departs for the magical waters of legend and dreams. Jason and the Argonauts, the quest for the Golden Fleece. In the misty realms of ancient Thessaly, where the morning fog dances between olive groves and the mountains touch the heavens themselves, there lived a young prince named Jason. His story begins not with triumph, but with loss, the kind of profound loss that shapes heroes from the clay of ordinary men. For Jason was not born to rule from a comfortable throne, but to earn his birthright through trials that would test the very essence of his soul. The winds of fate had blown harshly across the kingdom of Iolcos when Jason was but a child. His father, Aeson, had been a just and beloved king, ruling with wisdom that flowed like honey from the sacred oak trees. But power, like the tide, has its own rhythm, and Jason's uncle Peleus harbored ambitions as dark as storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Through cunning and treachery, Peleus seized the throne, casting a shadow over the land that would last for 20 years. Young Jason had been spirited away in the dead of night, carried by loyal servants through forests where ancient spirits whispered warnings among the leaves. They brought him to the slopes of Mount Pelion, where dwelt Chiron, the wisest of all centaurs, whose knowledge encompassed the movements of stars, the healing properties of every herb, and the secret arts of heroes. Here, beneath canopies of green that filtered sunlight into golden dreams, Jason would spend his youth learning the ways that would one day make him legendary. Chiron's teachings were gentle yet profound, like water wearing smooth the hardest stone. the young prince learned to read the language written in the flight of birds, to understand the whispered secrets that flowers share with the wind. He studied the constellations that wheel overhead in their eternal dance, each star a story, each constellation a map to destinations both earthly and divine. His hands grew strong from wielding sword and spear, his mind sharp from unraveling the riddles that nature poses to those who would truly see. But perhaps most importantly, Chiron taught Jason about honor, that quality that shines brighter than polished bronze and proves more valuable than all the gold in Colchis. Honor, the centaur would say during their long walks through meadows where wild roses bloomed, is not something one possesses, but something one becomes. It is the choice to do right when wrong would be easier, to speak truth when lies would be profitable, to stand firm when the whole world seems to sway. 20 years passed like seasons in a garden, each bringing its own gifts of growth and understanding. Jason grew tall and strong, his shoulders broad as a ship's beam, his eyes bright with the intelligence that comes from true learning. His hair fell in dark waves like the sea at midnight, and his voice carried the authority of one who had been shaped by wisdom itself. Yet always, in quiet moments when the mountain winds carried distant echoes, he remembered the kingdom that was rightfully his, waiting like a sleeping beauty for its true prince to return. The day of reckoning came with the spring, when the world awakened from winter's long slumber and the air itself seemed to pulse with possibility. Chiron, whose ancient eyes had seen empires rise and fall like waves upon the shore, placed a gentle hand upon Jason's shoulder as they stood overlooking the valley that stretched toward distant Iolcos. "My son," the centaur said, his voice carrying the weight of ages, "the time has come for you to claim what is yours by right. But remember, true kingship is not taken by force, but earned through deeds that echo in the hearts of men long after the doing." Jason's journey down from Mount Pelion took him through landscapes that seemed to shimmer with anticipation. Ancient oak trees swayed as if in greeting, their leaves rustling with what sounded almost like words of encouragement. Streams bubbled with unusual clarity, reflecting not just his face but something deeper, a glimpse of the destiny that awaited him. Animals paused in their daily pursuits to watch him pass, as if they too sensed that something momentous was stirring in the world. It was at a swollen river, swirling with spring melt and impossible to cross safely, that Jason encountered the first test of his character. An old woman sat on the muddy bank, her clothes tattered and her white hair disheveled by the wind. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed strangely familiar, though he was certain they had never met. "Young man," she called, her voice wavering like a reed in the breeze, "I am too frail to cross these waters alone. Would you have pity on an old woman and carry me to the other side?" Without hesitation, Jason lifted the woman onto his back, feeling how light she was, as if she were made of moonbeams and morning mist. The river fought him with every step, the current seeking to drag them both into its cold embrace. The water rose to his chest, then to his shoulders, and still he pressed on, driven by something deeper than mere courtesy. When they finally reached the far shore, both gasping and dripping, the old woman's eyes sparkled with a light that seemed almost divine. "You have done well, Jason of Iolcos," she said, and her voice had changed, becoming rich and resonant as temple bells. Before his astonished eyes, she transformed, her bent form straightening, her tattered clothes becoming robes of silver and gold. "I am Hera, Queen of Heaven, and because you showed kindness without thought of reward, I will be your protector in the trials that lie ahead." She smiled, and the very air seemed to shimmer with her blessing before she faded like morning mist touched by sunlight. But Jason's act of kindness had cost him something precious. In the swirling waters of the river, he had lost one of his sandals. He stood now on the muddy bank, 1 foot bare, water still dripping from his hair and clothes. Unknown to him, this loss would prove to be the key that unlocked his destiny, for there was an ancient prophecy that haunted the dreams of his uncle Peleus. A prediction that spoke of a man who would come with only 1 sandal, a man who would be the true king's downfall. The road to Iolcos stretched before him like a golden thread in the tapestry of fate. Jason walked with measured steps, his bare foot leaving prints in the earth that seemed to glow faintly in the afternoon light. Behind him, Mount Pelion rose like a guardian watching over his journey, while ahead, the spires of his ancestral city began to appear through the haze of distance. With each step, he could feel the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders like a cloak woven from starlight and dreams. The city of Iolcos had changed much in the 20 years of Peleus's rule. Where once there had been joy and prosperity, now shadows seemed to linger even in bright sunlight. The people moved through the streets with downcast eyes, their voices muted as if afraid that speaking too loudly might draw unwanted attention. Yet, as Jason passed among them, something stirred in their hearts, a recognition that ran deeper than memory, a sense that change walked among them in the form of a young man with 1 bare foot. Word of the stranger's arrival spread through the palace like ripples on a still pond. Servants whispered to guards, guards murmured to courtiers, and soon the news reached the ears of King Peleus himself. The usurper felt his blood turn to ice water when he heard the description: tall, noble bearing, dark hair, and most terrifying of all, wearing only 1 sandal. The prophecy that had haunted his sleep for 20 years was finally coming to pass. When Jason strode into the great hall, the assembled court fell silent as a tomb. His presence filled the space like sunlight flooding a cave, and those who looked upon him felt their hearts stir with half-remembered loyalty to the rightful royal line. Peleus sat upon the stolen throne, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests, trying to maintain the facade of confident authority while terror ate at his soul like acid. "Uncle," Jason said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall, "I have come to reclaim what is mine by right of birth. For 20 years you have ruled in my father's place, but the time has come for you to step aside and let the true king take his throne." His words were not spoken in anger, but with the calm certainty of one who knows that truth, like the dawn, cannot be prevented from arriving. Peleus rose slowly from the throne, his mind racing like a fox pursued by hounds. He could not simply refuse the young man's claim was legitimate, and there were still those in the court who remembered Aeson with love. But neither could he willingly surrender the power he had held for so long. Like water finding its way around a stone, his thoughts flowed toward cunning and deception. "My dear nephew," Peleus said, forcing his voice to sound warm and welcoming, "how you have grown. Your father would be proud to see the man you have become. But surely you understand that kingship cannot simply be handed over like a farmer's tool. A true king must prove himself worthy of the crown through deeds that inspire his people and demonstrate his fitness to rule." Jason nodded slowly, for Chiron had taught him that wisdom lies not just in knowing what is right, but in understanding when patience serves better than haste. "What would you have me do, uncle? Name the task, and if it lies within the power of mortal man to accomplish, I will see it done." The usurper's smile was cold as winter moonlight on fresh snow. In the depths of his calculating mind, he reached for the one quest that surely no man could survive a task so impossible that even to attempt it would be tantamount to embracing death itself. "There is indeed such a task," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "In the distant land of Colchis, beyond the clashing rocks that guard the entrance to the Black Sea, there hangs a golden fleece in the sacred grove of Ares. Bring me this fleece, dear nephew, and the throne of Iolcos shall be yours." A murmur ran through the assembled court like wind through grain. All knew the stories of the Golden Fleece, how it was guarded by a dragon that never slept, how the very seas themselves conspired against those who sought to reach Colchis, how kings and heroes had perished in the attempt. Surely, they thought, this was sending the young prince to certain death. But Jason's eyes lit with the fire of challenge accepted. In his heart, he felt the blessing of Hera stirring like warmth on a cold morning, and he knew with certainty that this quest was not merely a trap, but a doorway to something far greater than a simple throne. "I accept your challenge, uncle," he said, his voice ringing through the hall like a bell calling heroes to their destiny. "I will sail to Colchis and return with the Golden Fleece, and when I do, you will honor your word and restore to me my father's kingdom." That night, as Jason walked through the moonlit gardens of the palace where he had played as a child, he felt the presence of divinity around him like invisible companions. The stars seemed brighter than usual, arranged in patterns that spoke of voyages across wine-dark seas and adventures that would echo through the ages. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale sang a song that seemed to carry promises of love and loss, triumph and sacrifice. He thought of Chiron's teachings about the nature of heroism, how it was not the absence of fear but the mastery of it, how true courage lay not in the sword arm alone, but in the heart that chooses to stand firm when all seems lost. The quest for the Golden Fleece would test every lesson he had learned, every virtue he had cultivated, every dream he had harbored in his soul. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Jason made his way to the harbor where the fishing boats bobbed at anchor like sleeping seabirds. The old fishermen, their faces weathered by salt and sun, looked up from mending their nets to study this young man who stood gazing out at the endless expanse of water. Something in his bearing, something in the way he held his head, told them that here was one who was destined for great deeds upon the wine-dark sea. "If I am to reach Colchis," Jason murmured to the wind, "I will need a ship like no ship that has ever sailed. I will need companions whose courage matches their skill. And I will need the blessing of the gods to guide us through perils that would daunt the bravest hearts." As if in answer to his words, a gull cried overhead, its voice carried away on the morning breeze like a promise of adventures yet to come. Thus began the greatest quest in the annals of heroic deeds, born from a young prince's determination to reclaim his birthright and nurtured by the gods' own design. For Jason's journey to Colchis would become far more than a simple retrieval of a golden prize. It would become an odyssey of discovery, friendship, love, and the kind of heroism that transforms not just the hero, but all whose lives are touched by his passing. The sun climbed higher into the morning sky, painting the waters of the harbor in shades of liquid gold. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the salt-scented breeze, came the sound that would soon become as familiar as his own heartbeat, the whisper of waves against a ship's hull, calling him toward his destiny across the wine-dark sea. The shipwright Argus was a man whose hands held magic, not the sorceress kind that calls down lightning or transforms lead to gold, but the subtler magic that takes dead wood and breathes into it the soul of the sea. When Jason approached him with a commission for a vessel that could carry heroes to the very edge of the world, the old craftsman's eyes lit with the fire of a challenge that had waited his entire lifetime to be accepted. "I," he said, running weathered fingers along a timber that seemed to pulse within a life, "I can build you such a ship, but she'll be like no vessel that's ever kissed the waves before." In the sacred grove of Dodona, where the ancient oak trees whispered oracles in voices older than memory, Argus selected the timber that would form the Argo's speaking prow. This was no ordinary wood, but a branch gifted by Athena herself, goddess of wisdom and patroness of those who dare to challenge the impossible. When the shipwright's tools first touched this sacred timber, it sang a low, melodious note that seemed to harmonize with the rhythm of the craftsman's heartbeat and the distant murmur of waves upon distant shores. Day and night, the sound of hammer and adze rang through the shipyards of Iolcos like music of creation itself. The hull took shape with curves as graceful as a swan's neck, strong enough to withstand the battering of storms, yet swift enough to outrun the wind itself. The mast rose straight and true as a young pine reaching toward the stars, while the sail was woven from linen so fine it seemed spun from moonbeams and sea foam. With each passing day, the ship grew not just in size but in presence, as if aware of the great deeds that awaited her across the wine-dark sea. But a ship, however magnificent, is merely driftwood without a crew to give her purpose and direction. Jason knew that the quest for the Golden Fleece would demand companions whose courage matched their skills, heroes whose names would shine like stars in the constellation of legend. So he sent forth the call across all of Greece, carried by swift messengers to every kingdom, every city, every remote valley where great hearts might be stirring with the desire for glory and adventure. The first to answer Jason's summons was Heracles, whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. The son of Zeus stood head and shoulders above other men, his strength so legendary that mothers would frighten unruly children with tales of what happened to those who crossed the mighty hero. Yet when he clasped Jason's hand in greeting, his grip was gentle as a father's, and his eyes held the wisdom that comes only to those who have learned that true strength serves others rather than the self. "I have heard of your quest, young prince," Heracles said, his voice rumbling like distant mountains settling into sleep. "And though I have labors of my own awaiting completion, there is something about your cause that calls to my heart. Perhaps it is the righteousness of reclaiming stolen birthright. Or perhaps it is simply that the sea has been whispering your name in my dreams. Either way, my sword and my strength are yours for this venture." Close behind Heracles came the twins Castor and Pollux, sons of Zeus and Leda, whose bond was so strong that they shared not just blood but a single soul dwelling in two bodies. Castor was the master of horses, able to gentle the wildest stallion with whispered words that sounded like wind through meadow grass. Pollux was the boxer whose fists moved faster than hummingbird wings, yet never struck in anger, only in defense of those too weak to defend themselves. Together, they brought to Jason's cause not just skill, but the kind of loyalty that knows no questioning, no hesitation, no thought of personal gain. From the pine-clad slopes of Mount Selene came Orpheus, whose lyre could make stones weep and rivers pause in their courses to listen. His music was not merely sound, but pure emotion given form, capable of soothing savage beasts or stirring the bravest hearts to deeds of surpassing glory. When he played, The very air seemed to shimmer with colors that had no names, and those who heard his songs found their souls lifted to heights they had never imagined possible. Music, he told Jason as they walked along the shore where the Argo was taking shape, is the language that speaks to the deepest part of every living thing. Where swords might fail and words prove insufficient, a song might open doors that seem forever sealed. Lynx-eyed Lynceus arrived with the dawn, his gaze so keen that he could see ships beyond the horizon and count the scales on fish swimming in the deepest parts of the sea. His companion Idas came with him, a warrior whose spear never missed its target and whose loyalty burned as bright as forge fire. Together they had faced perils that would have broken lesser men, and their presence added to Jason's growing band the invaluable gifts of foresight and unwavering determination. From the northern reaches of Thessaly came the winged brothers Calais and Zetes, sons of the North Wind himself. Their feathers shimmered with all the colors of the sky at dawn, and when they flew, they moved with the speed and grace of thought itself. They had spent their lives chasing harpies away from those who deserved peace, and their hearts were filled with the kind of righteous anger that transforms itself into protective love. "We have flown over the path you must take," Zetes told Jason, his voice carrying the whisper of wind through high places. "The way is perilous beyond imagining, but for a cause as noble as yours, we would follow you to the very edge of the world itself." Atalanta came from the forests of Arcadia, running so swiftly that she seemed to barely touch the earth with her feet. She was the huntress who could track a shadow through moonless night, whose arrows flew straighter than the path of destiny itself. Some muttered that a woman had no place aboard a ship bound for such dangers, but Jason looked into her eyes and saw there a courage that burned as pure as starlight. "The Golden Fleece lies in a land where cunning will serve better than brute strength," he said, extending his hand to her in welcome. "And I can think of no one whose wisdom I would value more highly when the path ahead grows dark and treacherous." One by one, they came heroes from every corner of the known world, drawn by the call of adventure and the promise of deeds that would echo through the ages. There was Admetus, king of Phyrae, whose gentleness had once moved Apollo himself to serve as his shepherd. Ancaeus the helmsman, whose knowledge of winds and currents was surpassed only by his ability to read the moods of the sea in the color of the waves. Euphemos, who could run across the surface of water as easily as solid ground, and whose speed had once outpaced the dolphins themselves. From distant Arcadia came Amphidamas and Cepheus, warriors whose spears had never tasted defeat and whose hearts knew no fear. Asterion joined them, son of Cometes, whose strength was matched only by his gentle nature toward those in need of protection. Augeas arrived from Elis, bringing with him knowledge of distant lands and customs that would prove invaluable in the trials ahead. Each hero brought not just skill and courage, but stories of their own tales, of monsters slain, kingdoms saved, and impossible tasks completed through determination and honor. As the company of heroes grew, so did the ship that would carry them across perilous seas. The Argo's hull gleamed like polished silver in the morning light, her lines so perfect that she seemed less built than grown, as if the sea itself had dreamed her into being. When the sacred timber from Dodona was fitted into her prow, the entire ship seemed to sigh with contentment, like a living thing finally finding its true voice. Argus stepped back from his completed work with tears in his eyes, for he knew he had created not just a vessel, but a legend that would sail through stories for as long as humanity remembered the meaning of heroism. The naming ceremony took place at dawn on the summer solstice, when the sun's power was at its peak and the blessing of the gods flowed most freely through the world. Jason stood in the ship's prow, one hand resting on the sacred timber that would guide their way, the other raised toward the lightning sky. Around him, his companions stood in silence, each feeling the weight of destiny settling upon their shoulders like cloaks woven from starlight and dreams. "We name you Argo," Jason said, his voice carrying clearly across the harbor where crowds had gathered to witness the birth of legend. "Swift as the arrow that flies from the hero's bow, sure as the path that leads the righteous home. May you carry us safely through whatever perils await, and bring us back again with our quest fulfilled and our honor intact." As he spoke these words, the timber in the prow seemed to pulse with warm life, and a voice like wind through ancient leaves whispered words of acceptance and promise. The Argonauts, for so they would be called throughout all the ages to come, spent the final days before departure in preparation that was as much spiritual as practical. They offered sacrifices to Poseidon, lord of the wine-dark sea, asking for fair winds and safe passage through waters that had claimed so many brave souls. They made offerings to Athena, seeking wisdom for the challenges ahead, and to Zeus, father of gods, requesting his protection over their noble enterprise. Orpheus composed songs for the journey, melodies that would lift their spirits when homesickness threatened to overwhelm them, and rhythms that would help coordinate their rowing when they faced contrary winds. His lyre sang with the voices of all the places they would miss children, laughing in sunny courtyards, lovers meeting in moonlit gardens, farmers singing as they gathered the harvest beneath autumn skies. Yet woven through these melancholy strains was a thread of gold that spoke of adventures waiting to be born, and friendships that would endure beyond the very stars themselves. The night before their departure, Jason walked alone along the shore where wavelets lapped against the sand with sounds like whispered blessings. The moon hung full and bright above the horizon, painting a silver path across the water that seemed to point toward distant Colchis and the Golden Fleece that awaited him there. In his heart, he felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation that reminded him of the moment before diving from a high cliff, the instant when courage and fear danced together in perfect, terrifying balance. Are you ready for what lies ahead? The voice came from behind him, soft as silk and warm as sunlight on spring flowers. Jason turned to see Hera, Queen of Heaven, standing on the moonlit sand with starlight caught in her hair and wisdom shining in her eyes. She had come to him as she had promised, drawn by his act of kindness at the river crossing that now seemed a lifetime ago. "I believe I am, Divine Queen," Jason replied, inclining his head respectfully. "Though I confess the magnitude of what we attempt sometimes takes my breath away. To sail beyond the edge of the known world, to face perils that exist only in legend, to seek a prize that may be nothing more than a beautiful dream, it seems too grand for mortal men to achieve." Hera smiled, and the very air seemed to sparkle with her divine radiance. "That is precisely why it must be achieved by mortal men," she said. "The gods can perform wonders with a thought, but only mortal courage can transform the impossible into the inevitable. You will face trials that will test every virtue you possess. Moments when the easiest path will be to turn back toward familiar shores. But remember, greatness is not measured by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to continue forward despite it." She gestured toward the Argo, where moonlight gleamed on polished wood and bronze fittings. "Your ship is ready, your crew assembled, and your cause is just. More than that, you carry with you something more precious than any golden fleece, the hopes and dreams of all who believe that heroes still walk among us. Do not disappoint them, Jason of Iolcos. And do not disappoint yourself." With those words, she faded like morning mist touched by sunrise, leaving Jason alone with his thoughts and the endless murmur of waves against the shore. He stood there until the first pale fingers of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, thinking of all the preparations that had brought him to this moment, all the choices that had led to this threshold between the known and the unknown. As the sun climbed higher, the harbor began to fill with the sounds of departure crew members calling to one another as they made final adjustments to rigging and supplies, the creak of rope and timber as the Argo stirred restlessly at her moorings. The people of Iolcos gathered along the waterfront to see them off, some weeping for loved ones who might not return, others cheering for the glory that awaited these brave souls. Heracles was the first aboard, his great bulk making the ship settle slightly in the water as he took his place at the rowing bench. One by one, the other heroes followed, each finding his assigned position with the practiced ease of those born to the sea. Orpheus took his place near the bow where his music could reach every ear, while Atalanta positioned herself where her keen eyes could watch for dangers ahead. The twins Castor and Pollux claimed benches side by side, as if even in this they could not bear to be separated. Jason stood in the stern, one hand on the steering oar, the other shading his eyes as he looked toward the harbor mouth, where open sea beckoned like an invitation written in foam and sunlight. Behind him lay everything familiar and safe, the kingdom he hoped to reclaim, the people who looked to him for salvation, the life he had always known. Ahead lay mystery and danger, adventure, and the possibility of glory beyond imagining. "Cast off the lines," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had been bred into his bones through generations of royal blood. The ropes that bound them to the known world fell away with splashes that seemed to echo like farewell kisses upon the water. The Argo stirred like a living thing awakening, her hull cutting through the harbor water with eagerness that matched the racing hearts of her crew. As they cleared the harbor mouth and felt the first true swells of the open sea lift their ship like gentle hands, Orpheus began to play. His song was one of beginnings of dawns breaking over new horizons, of seeds sprouting in springtime soil, of young eagles spreading their wings for the first flight from the nest. The music seemed to fill their sails more effectively than any wind, carrying them forward into the vast blue expanse that stretched endlessly toward their destiny. The sacred timber in the Argo's prow began to speak, its voice blending with the music and the whisper of waves against the hull. "Courage, heroes," it said in tones like wind through ancient forests. "The path ahead is long and fraught with perils, but you carry within yourselves all that is needed to overcome whatever challenges await. Trust in your brotherhood, believe in your cause, and remember that the greatest treasures are often found not at journey's end, but in the traveling itself." The coast of Thessaly grew smaller behind them, fading into a blue haze that might have been mountain peaks or merely clouds kissing the horizon. Ahead, the sea stretched endlessly onward, its surface dancing with wavelets that caught the sunlight and threw it back in patterns too complex and beautiful for mortal minds to fully comprehend. Somewhere beyond that watery horizon lay Colchis and the Golden Fleece that would restore Jason to his rightful throne. But that prize seemed almost secondary now to the adventure itself, the joy of sailing with companions whose hearts beat in harmony with his own, the thrill of facing the unknown with courage born of righteous purpose. For Jason was beginning to understand what Chiron had tried to teach him all those years ago on Mount Pelion, that the true treasure of any quest lies not in gold or fleece, but in the transformation of the soul that occurs when ordinary mortals dare to reach for extraordinary dreams. The wind filled their sail with a sound like divine laughter, carrying them ever eastward toward horizons where legend and reality danced together in patterns as old as time itself. Behind them, their wake spread in a widening V that marked their passage across waters that had never felt the touch of such a ship crewed by such heroes bound upon such a mission. The sun climbed higher into the morning sky, painting their sail golden and warming their faces with the promise of adventures yet to come. Thus began the voyage of the Argo, carrying her crew of heroes toward a destiny that would be written in stars and sung by poets until the end of time itself. The great ship rode the swells with the grace of a seabird, her sacred timber prow cutting through the waves as if the sea itself welcomed their passage. And in the hearts of every man aboard there burned the bright flame of purpose that transforms ordinary voyages into legends and ordinary men into heroes whose deeds echo through eternity. 7 days out from Iolcos, the Argo encountered her first taste of the supernatural forces that would test the Argonauts throughout their legendary voyage. The morning had dawned calm and fair, with gentle swells lifting the ship in a rhythm as regular as a sleeping giant's breathing. But as the sun climbed toward its zenith, a strange mist began to gather on the horizon, rolling toward them with unnatural speed and carrying within its gray depths the sound of voices raised in anguish and despair. "Look there," called Lynceus from his position in the bow, his keen eyes piercing the growing haze. "I see an island rising from the mist, but it is like no land I have ever beheld. The very stones seem to writhe in torment, and the air above shimmers with heat that has nothing to do with the sun." His words sent a ripple of unease through the crew, for they had all heard tales of cursed islands where unwary sailors met fates worse than drowning in the wine-dark sea. As the Argo drew closer, the mist parted like curtains drawn aside by invisible hands, revealing the island of Lemnos in all its tragic splendor. The shores were lined with marble quays and elegant buildings that spoke of great wealth and refinement, but an oppressive silence hung over everything like a shroud woven from loneliness and loss. No smoke rose from the chimneys, no voices carried across the water. No signs of life stirred anywhere along the seemingly prosperous coastline. "It appears deserted," murmured Orpheus, his sensitive soul already picking up the subtle harmonies of sorrow that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the harbor. "Yet there is something here that calls to me not danger, but a pain so deep that it has become almost a living thing in its own right." His fingers moved unconsciously to his lyre, as if music might be needed to heal whatever wounds festered in this place of apparent abandonment. Jason felt the sacred timber of the Argo's prow grow warm beneath his hand, and he knew that their ship was trying to communicate something important. "What counsel do you offer?" he whispered to the enchanted wood, and the answer came back in tones like wind through ancient groves. "Land here, young prince, but keep your hearts open and your judgment merciful. What appears to be death may merely be another form of life, and what seems like ending may be the beginning of something far more beautiful than what came before." As the Argo's anchor bit into the sandy bottom of Lemnos harbor, the silence that had seemed so complete was broken by the sound of footsteps on marble, many footsteps moving with purpose toward the waterfront. From behind pillars and doorways emerged figures that made the Argonauts catch their breath in wonder, for here were women of such beauty that they seemed to have stepped from the dreams of gods themselves. At their head walked Queen Hypsipyle, her dark hair flowing like midnight water over shoulders draped in purple silk that caught the sunlight and threw it back in shimmers of royal radiance. Her eyes held depths that spoke of wisdom earned through suffering, and when she smiled in greeting, it was with the warm grace of one who had learned to find joy again after walking through valleys of shadow and despair. "Welcome, noble travelers," she called, her voice carrying easily across the water between ship and shore. "It has been too long since Lemnos has known the honor of hosting such distinguished guests. Come, share our hospitality, and let us show you that reports of our island's desolation have been greatly exaggerated." Behind her, the other women nodded and smiled, their beauty enhanced rather than diminished by the subtle sadness that lingered in their eyes like morning mist in a garden of remembrance. The Argonauts exchanged glances of uncertainty, for while the welcome seemed genuine, there was something about the situation that felt incomplete, like a tapestry with crucial threads missing from its weave. Heracles, ever practical, was the first to voice the question that troubled them all. "Your hospitality honors us, gracious queen," he called back, "but we cannot help but notice that your island seems to be inhabited solely by women. What has become of your husbands, your fathers, your sons?" A shadow passed over Hypsipyle's face like a cloud crossing the sun, and for a moment the assembled women seemed to draw closer together, as if seeking comfort in their shared sorrow. But the queen's voice remained steady when she replied, though it carried now a note of pain that touched every heart that heard it. "That, noble heroes, is a tale that requires telling properly, with wine to ease its bitter taste and time for its full meaning to unfold. Come ashore, and we will share with you the story of how Lemnos became a kingdom ruled by daughters rather than fathers." Jason looked to his companions and saw in their faces the same mixture of curiosity and compassion that stirred in his own heart. These women had clearly suffered some great calamity, and while prudence counseled caution, honor demanded that they at least listen to their tale before sailing on. Besides, the Argo and her crew needed fresh water and supplies, and the harbor of Lemnos offered the first safe anchorage they had encountered since leaving the familiar shores of Thessaly. "We accept your gracious invitation," Jason replied, beginning to lower the ship's boat. "But understand that we are bound upon an urgent quest and cannot linger long, however pleasant your company might prove to be." Even as he spoke these words, he felt a strange reluctance to leave this place that seemed to promise respite from the dangers and uncertainties that lay ahead. The palace of Hypsipyle was a marvel of architecture that seemed designed to celebrate the feminine spirit in all its aspects. Graceful columns carved with reliefs of flowering vines, fountains that sang with voices like silver bells, gardens where every flower known to grow in mortal soil bloomed in defiance of season and natural order. The Argonauts found themselves welcomed with warmth that felt genuine despite the underlying current of melancholy that flowed through everything like an underground river of unshed tears. As evening painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, they gathered in the great hall where torches burned with light that seemed somehow softer and more golden than ordinary flame. The women of Lemnos served them food that surpassed anything they had tasted, bread that seemed baked from sunshine itself, wine that carried in its depths the essence of summer afternoons, fruits that burst with flavors so perfect they seemed like memories of paradise made manifest. When the last course had been served, and the wine cups filled again with liquid that sparkled like liquid starlight, Queen Hypsipyle rose from her place at the head of the long table. The hall fell silent, for all could sense that the moment had come for the telling of the story that explained this kingdom of beautiful, sorrowing women. "You ask what became of our men," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall, "and you deserve an answer, for your hearts are noble and your quest is just. Know then that our sorrow began with the greatest of all follies, the forgetting of the gods who shower us with blessings, and the neglect of those divine powers that make life itself possible." She moved to stand beside a great window that looked out over the moonlit harbor where the Argo rode at anchor like a promise of adventures yet to come. The women of Lemnos were once blessed by Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, who made us fair beyond the common lot of mortal women. Our husbands were the envy of men throughout the world. Our children grew strong and beautiful as young saplings reaching toward the sun. We were, we thought, the most fortunate of mortals. The queen's voice grew heavy with regret, and several of the women in the hall began to weep silent tears that gleamed like pearls in the torchlight. But prosperity breeds forgetfulness, and happiness can blind us to the sources of our good fortune. Gradually, we ceased to honor Aphrodite as we should. Her temples fell into neglect. Her festivals became perfunctory observances rather than celebrations of the heart. We took our beauty for granted, assuming it would last forever without proper reverence for the goddess who had bestowed it. Hypsipyle turned back to face her guests, and in her eyes burned the terrible clarity that comes only to those who have learned wisdom through devastating loss. The divine patience has its limits, and when we had ignored her warnings long enough, Aphrodite struck us with a curse as terrible as her former blessings had been wonderful. She filled our bodies with such a stench that no man could bear to come near us, and our husbands fled from us as if we carried the plague itself. A collective intake of breath ran through the assembled Argonauts, for they could imagine no fate more terrible for women who had been blessed with supernatural beauty than to be rendered repulsive to those they loved most dearly. But Hypsipyle was not finished with her tale of divine retribution and mortal consequence. In their revulsion, our men took ship for Thrace, where they captured women to replace the wives they could no longer bear to touch. They brought these foreign women back to Lemnos, flaunting their new loves in our faces, caring nothing for the pain they caused, or the children who wept for fathers who now looked upon them with disgust. Her voice grew harder now, edged with the steel that suffering sometimes forges in even the gentlest hearts. We endured this humiliation as long as mortal souls could bear, but there comes a point where patience transforms into something far more dangerous. One night, when the wine flowed freely and our men celebrated their foreign women with particular cruelty, we could stand no more. We rose as one and drove them from our island, drove them out with such finality that none dared ever return. The hall was silent as a tomb now, save for the soft sound of weeping and the distant murmur of waves against the harbor walls. The Argonauts sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what they had heard, an entire island's worth of men exiled by their own wives and daughters, families torn asunder by divine wrath and human pride. "But how," asked Jason gently, "do you live now? How do you manage the affairs of a kingdom, the raising of children, the countless tasks that require strong backs and skilled hands?" His question came not from judgment, but from genuine concern for these women who had suffered so greatly. Hypsipyle's smile was sad but proud. "We have learned, noble prince, that women are capable of far more than men or we ourselves ever imagined. We tend our own fields, guard our own shores, govern our own affairs with wisdom that perhaps comes naturally to those who have given birth and raised children. As for the blessing of Aphrodite," she gestured around the hall at the assembled women, whose beauty seemed to glow even brighter in the soft torchlight. "The goddess has relented in her anger. We are fair again, perhaps fairer than before, but we are also wiser than we were." The evening deepened into night, and still the Argonauts found themselves reluctant to take their leave of this island where sorrow and beauty dwelt together in such strange harmony. The women of Lemnos seemed equally reluctant to see them go, for it had been long since they had enjoyed the company of men whose hearts held honor rather than cruelty, whose presence brought comfort rather than pain. One by one, the heroes found themselves drawn into conversations that lasted deep into the night, sharing stories of their own adventures, listening to tales of how the women had rebuilt their society from the ashes of their old life. Orpheus played his lyre, and for the first time in years, the palace of Lemnos rang with genuine laughter and songs of joy rather than sorrow. Jason found himself walking with Queen Hypsipyle through gardens that bloomed with night-flowering jasmine and roses that released their perfume to the cooling air. The moon hung full and bright overhead, painting everything in silver light that seemed to soften the edges of pain and make even old sorrows beautiful. "Your quest," the queen said softly as they paused beside a fountain where water fell in sheets of liquid music. "It is a noble one, but also dangerous beyond imagining. The Golden Fleece is guarded by powers that have destroyed heroes greater than any who walk the earth today. Are you certain that a throne is worth such risk?" Jason considered her words carefully, for he had learned to value the wisdom that comes from those who have survived great trials. "It is not the throne itself that drives me," he said at last, "but what that throne represents: justice restored, promises kept, the natural order of things returned to its proper balance. My uncle's rule has brought suffering to many innocent people, just as the neglect of Aphrodite brought suffering to your island. Sometimes the healing of old wounds requires deeds that seem impossible to achieve." Hypsipyle nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like recognition of kindred spirits. "Then you will not be turned from your path by comfort or beauty or even love itself?" There was something in her voice that made Jason look at her more closely, seeing for the first time the hope that flickered in her eyes like candlelight in darkness. "My lady," he said gently, taking her hand in his, "if circumstances were different, if I were not bound by oath and honor to complete this quest, there is nowhere in all the world I would rather remain than here, in your gardens, in your company. But I cannot be the man you deserve, the man any woman deserves, until I have fulfilled the obligations that brought me to the sea in the first place." They stood together in the moonlight, two souls who had found in each other something precious and rare, yet who were bound by duty and circumstance to let it slip away like water through cupped hands. The fountain sang its liquid song beside them, and somewhere in the distance the night wind whispered secrets to the flowering trees. "I understand," Hypsipyle said at last, though her voice trembled slightly with the effort of speaking the words, "and I honor you for your dedication to your cause. But know that you and your companions will always have a home here on Lemnos, should you ever need refuge or simply wish to rest among those who remember your kindness." The next morning dawned clear and bright, with favorable winds that seemed sent by the gods themselves to speed the Argonauts on their way. The women of Lemnos gathered on the quays to see them off, their faces brave but their eyes bright with unshed tears. Supplies of fresh water, food, and wine were loaded aboard the Argo, along with gifts of jewelry and fine cloth that would serve as trading goods in the strange lands that lay ahead. As the anchor was raised and the sail filled with morning wind, Jason stood in the stern looking back at the island that had given them such an unexpected interlude of beauty and sorrow. Hypsipyle stood at the end of the longest pier, her hand raised in farewell, her purple robes rippling in the breeze like the wings of some great butterfly poised for flight. "Will we see them again?" asked Orpheus, his sensitive heart already missing the harmony of voices that had joined his lyre songs the night before. "Perhaps," Jason replied, though his voice carried the weight of one who understands that some partings are final, no matter how much the heart might wish otherwise. "But if not in this life, then surely in whatever realm awaits heroes who have loved truly and parted honorably. The island of Lemnos faded into the morning haze behind them, but its lesson remained bright in their hearts, that courage takes many forms, that wisdom can be born from suffering, and that sometimes the greatest heroism lies not in the winning of battles, but in the grace with which one accepts the losses that life inevitably brings. 3 days later, with the sun climbing high in a cloudless sky, they encountered the second of the supernatural challenges that would test their resolve and unity. The lookout called down from the masthead that strange shapes were moving through the water ahead. Not whales or dolphins, but something far more ominous that sent ripples of unease through the watching crew. As the Argo drew closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Rising from the depths came creatures that belonged to nightmare rather than the natural world women, from the waist up, but with the bodies of great birds below, their wings spanning wider than the Argo's beam, their talons gleaming like bronze weapons in the bright sunlight. These were the Harpies, the storm winds made flesh, creatures of such foulness that their very presence poisoned the air and turned the stomach of even the bravest warrior. "The Strophides," breathed Zetes, his wings already spreading in preparation for flight. "The islands where the Harpies have made their roost, and where they torment the blind prophet Phineus with eternal hunger that can never be satisfied." His brother Calais nodded grimly, both sons of the North Wind understanding that their moment of destiny had arrived. Even as they watched, the foul creatures descended upon the rocky shores of the nearest island, where an old man sat, hunched in misery beside a table, laden with food that he could see but never taste. The Harpies fell upon the feast like vultures on carrion, their claws and beaks tearing at the delicacies while their wings beat the air with such violence that the very ground shook beneath their fury. "That must be Phineus," Jason said, his heart filling with pity for the old prophet's plight. The seer who was punished by Zeus for revealing too much of the future to mortal men. They say he was struck blind and cursed with eternal hunger, tormented by the Harpies who steal or foul any food that comes within his reach. The sacred timber of the Argo's prow grew warm beneath Jason's hand, and its voice whispered urgently in his ear, "This meeting is no chance encounter, young prince. The blind seer holds knowledge you will need for the trials ahead, but first you must free him from the torment that clouds his mind and prevents him from sharing what he knows. Trust in your winged companions, for they carry the power to cleanse this place of its ancient curse." "Calais, Zetes," Jason called to the sons of the North Wind. "The time has come to use the gifts your divine father gave you. Can you drive these foul creatures away from the poor old man they torment?" The winged brothers exchanged glances of grim determination. "We have long awaited this moment," Calais replied, his feathers already beginning to ruffle with the power of wind building within him. "Our father charged us with this task when first we took wing to pursue the Harpies, to the very edge of the world if necessary, and to free those who suffer under their curse. With cries that rang like storm winds through mountain peaks, the brothers launched themselves from the Argo's deck, their wings carrying them swifter than arrows toward the afflicted shore. The harpies looked up from their foul feast, their eyes burning with malevolent intelligence as they recognized their ancient enemies approaching. With shrieks that split the air like thunder, they took wing to meet the challenge, their talons extended and their beaks gaping wide to reveal teeth like broken glass. The battle that followed was like watching the fundamental forces of nature at war with each other. The harpies fought with the desperate fury of creatures who knew that their time of dominance was ending, their wings beating hurricanes of poisoned air that would have felled lesser opponents. But Calais and Zetes flew with the pure power of the wind itself, untouched by the corruption that flowed from their enemies, striking with the clean force of storm fronts sweeping across the open sea. Higher and higher the chase carried them, until they were mere specks against the blue dome of the sky. The sound of their conflict echoed across the water like distant thunder, and the very air seemed to clear as the harpies were driven further and further from their island stronghold. At last, even the keenest eyes could no longer follow their flight, though the wind still carried faint echoes of battle from the direction of the far horizon. When silence finally returned to the Strophides, Jason ordered the Argo brought to shore, where the old prophet Phineus sat, weeping tears of gratitude beside his table of food that was at last his to enjoy in peace. The blind seer was ancient beyond imagining, his hair white as sea foam and his skin weathered by years of suffering, but his voice was strong and clear when he spoke. "Bless you, noble heroes," he said, reaching out with trembling hands to touch Jason's face as if to assure himself that his rescuers were real. "For longer than I care to remember, I have endured the torment of eternal hunger while food rotted before my eyes, spoiled by those foul creatures who made my existence a mockery of life itself. You have given me back not just the ability to eat, but something far more precious, hope that divine justice, though it may tarry, never fails to arrive when most needed." As if to prove his words, Calais and Zetes came spiraling down from the sky, their wings spread wide to catch the air currents as they settled gracefully on the rocky shore. Their feathers were still ruffled from battle, but their eyes shone with the satisfaction of a duty long awaited and finally fulfilled. "It is done," Zetes announced, his chest still heaving from the exertion of prolonged flight. "We chased them beyond the floating islands, past the very edge of the world where the waters fall into the void itself. They have sworn by the river Styx never again to trouble this place or torment the innocent with their presence." Phineus wept again, but now his tears were pearls of joy rather than drops of despair. "My deliverers," he whispered, "ask of me whatever knowledge you seek, for my gift of prophecy is yours to command." Though Zeus struck me blind for revealing too much of the future, I can still share what wisdom will aid you in your noble quest. Jason knelt beside the old prophet, taking his gnarled hands in his own strong ones. "We seek the Golden Fleece in the distant land of Colchis," he said. "Tell us what perils await on the path ahead, and how we might overcome them through courage and cunning combined." The blind seer's milky eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the physical world, gazing into the swirling mists of possibility and fate. "Ah," he breathed, his voice taking on the distant quality of one who speaks from the borders of divine vision. "I see your path clearly now, young prince of Iolcos. Great trials await you, but also great triumphs for those who hold fast to honor when the darkness closes in." "First," he continued, his voice growing stronger as the prophetic vision took hold, "you must pass through the clashing rocks, the symplegades that guard the entrance to the Black Sea. These mighty stones rush together with the speed of divine wrath, crushing any ship that tries to pass between them. But I will tell you the secret of safe passage. Send forth a dove to fly before your ship, and when the rocks crush together on the bird, they will rebound just far enough for your swift vessel to slip through behind." The Argonauts listened intently, memorizing every word that might mean the difference between life and death in the trials ahead. Phineus continued, his blind eyes fixed on visions that danced behind closed lids. "Beyond the rocks lies the Black Sea, and at its far eastern shore, the kingdom of Colchis, where King Aeetes guards the Golden Fleece with jealous care. He will not give up his prize easily, but will set you tasks that seem impossible to complete. Yet remember this, the heart that loves truly can accomplish miracles that strength alone cannot achieve. Trust in the power of love, young Jason, for it will be your salvation when all other hopes have failed." The prophet's voice grew softer now, tinged with sadness for sorrows yet to come. "But know also that the quest will change you all in ways you cannot now imagine. Some who sail from here will not return, and those who do will bear scars both visible and hidden. The Golden Fleece will be yours, but the price of claiming it will be higher than you dream. Are you prepared to pay what the fates will demand?" Jason felt a chill run through him despite the warm sunshine, but his voice remained steady when he replied, "We knew when we began this quest that it would test us beyond our limits," he said. "But the cause is just, and we trust in the gods to see us through whatever trials await. Your warning is noted and appreciated, wise Phineus, but it will not turn us from our chosen path." The old seer smiled, and for a moment his face was illuminated with the kind of inner light that comes to those who have seen both the worst and best that life can offer. "Spoken like a true hero," he said warmly. "Then go with my blessing, and know that though the path ahead is dark, you carry with you light enough to illuminate even the deepest shadows. The Golden Fleece awaits, and with it a destiny greater than any throne." They lingered on the Strophides, only long enough to share a meal with the grateful prophet, and to hear more of his wisdom about the lands and peoples they would encounter. When the time came to depart, Phineas stood on the shore waving farewell, his face bright with the joy of one who has finally found peace after years of torment. As the Argo sailed away from the now peaceful islands, Jason stood in the bow, looking toward the horizon where their greatest challenge awaited. Behind them lay the memory of beautiful Lemnos and its sorrowful queen, the triumph over the Harpies, and the wisdom gained from the blind prophet. Ahead lay the clashing rocks and the Black Sea beyond, where the Golden Fleece waited in its sacred grove like a golden star fallen to earth. "The true adventure begins now," he murmured to the wind, and felt the sacred timber of the prow pulse with agreement beneath his hand. For they had been tested and found worthy, tempered by trials that had forged them into something more than they had been when they first set sail from Iolcos. Now they sailed not just as heroes, but as true companions bound by shared purpose and mutual trust, ready to face whatever wonders and terrors awaited in the realm of legend that lay beyond the next horizon. The Symplegades rose from the churning waters, like titans awakening from primordial slumber, their massive stone faces scarred by countless eons of violent collision. These were the clashing rocks that guarded the gateway between the known world and the mysterious realm of the Black Sea, where legends took solid form and the impossible became merely improbable. As the Argo approached through morning mist that seemed thick as wool, the very air trembled with the sound of stone grinding against stone, a deep harmonic vibration that reached into the bones of every man aboard and spoke of powers older than the gods themselves. "There," whispered Lynceus, his keen eyes piercing the haze to discern the true magnitude of what awaited them. "I can see them now, 2 mountains torn from their roots and set adrift upon the wine, dark sea, forever seeking to unite in an embrace that would crush anything caught between them. They move with the rhythm of a vast heartbeat, drawing apart only to smash together again with force enough to shatter the bones of the earth itself." The sacred timber in the Argo's prow began to sing, not with words, but with a melody that seemed to harmonize with the deep grinding music of the clashing rocks themselves. Jason placed his hand upon the enchanted wood and felt its message flow through him like warm honey mixed with mountain wine. "Courage now, young prince," it seemed to whisper. "The moment approaches when all your preparation must be focused into a single instant of perfect timing. 0, 5, trust in the wisdom of the blind seer, trust in your ship, and trust in the bonds that unite your heroes as brothers of the heart." From the leather pouch at his belt, Jason withdrew the dove that Phineas had given them, a bird of purest white, whose eyes held intelligence far beyond that of common creatures. As he held the creature gently in his cupped palms, he could feel its tiny heart beating with the same rhythm that pulsed through the Symplegades, as if bird and rocks were connected by invisible threads woven from the fabric of destiny itself. "Remember what the prophet told us," Jason called to his companions, his voice carrying clearly over the groaning symphony of stone and sea. "When the dove flies between the rocks and they crash together, we must follow immediately in that moment when they rebound to their widest separation. Our timing must be perfect too early, and we will be crushed too late, and the passage will close before we can slip through." The Argonauts took their positions with the practiced efficiency of heroes who had learned to trust each other completely. Heracles and the strongest rowers gripped their oars like warriors grasping spears before battle, their muscles coiled and ready to unleash every ounce of power they possessed. Orpheus stood ready with his lyre, prepared to play the rhythm that would coordinate their strokes into a symphony of speed. Atalanta positioned herself where her keen eyes could judge distances with the precision of an archer selecting her mark. The clashing rocks drew apart with a sound like the world's foundations settling into place, revealing between them a channel of water that sparkled blue as summer sky. For a long moment they remained separated, as if even the titans of stone needed time to gather strength for their next collision. This was the moment, the brief instant when passage was possible for those with courage enough to trust in prophecy and skill enough to make prophecy reality. "Fly swift and true, little messenger," Jason whispered to the dove, lifting his hands toward the gap between the rocks. The bird took wing with a sound like silk tearing, its white form gleaming against the dark stone as it arrowed straight toward the narrow passage. Every eye on the Argo followed its flight. Every heart beat in rhythm with its wing beats. Every soul held its breath as the dove approached the point where life and death balanced on the edge of perfect timing. The rocks began to groan inward, their massive bulk accelerating with frightening speed as the inexorable forces that bound them together overcame the divine powers that held them apart. The dove flew straight and true, its white wings a blur against the closing gap, until at the last possible instant it shot through the narrowing space like an arrow of hope made manifest in feathers and hollow bones. The Symplegades crashed together with a sound that shattered, thought itself a collision so tremendous that the very sea recoiled from its force, sending waves racing outward in all directions like liquid mountains fleeing from the wrath of awakened gods. When the echoes faded and the waters calmed, the dove could be seen circling beyond the rocks, missing only a single tail feather that had been pinched away by the closing stones. "Now!" Jason roared, his voice cutting through the rumbling aftershock like a sword through silk. "Row as you have never rowed before. Let every stroke carry the power of your love for life, your dedication to our cause, and your trust in the bonds that make us brothers." Orpheus struck up a rhythm on his lyre that seemed to capture the very heartbeat of heroism itself, a driving, pulsing melody that flowed through the blood and bones of every rower. coordinating their efforts into something greater than the sum of individual strength. The Argo leaped forward like a living thing released from bondage, her prow cutting through the water with such speed that spray flew back over the crew in sheets of liquid crystal. Behind them, the clashing rocks began their slow, inevitable separation, grinding apart with the same inexorable power that had brought them together. But the gap widened with agonizing slowness, as if the very stones were reluctant to release their grip on each other and allow mere mortals to pass between them unchallenged. The Argo raced toward the narrow channel with every fiber of sail and sinew straining toward maximum speed, the sacred timber prow singing its encouragement as salt spray kissed the heroes' faces. "Hold the rhythm," Jason called as they approached the gap, now widening but still terrifyingly narrow for a ship of the Argo's beam. The rocks loomed above them like the walls of some impossible canyon, their surfaces marked with scars from countless collisions and stained with the salt of ages. For a heart-stopping moment it seemed they would not make it. The gap appeared too narrow, their speed too slow, the distance too great. But then they were through, shooting into the calm waters beyond the Symplegades, like an arrow finding its mark after a perfect release. Behind them, the rocks ground together one final time, but with less violence than before, as if their ancient hunger had been partially satisfied by the feather they had claimed from the prophetic dove. The sound of their collision was different now, less like the roar of titans and more like the satisfied sigh of a task completed. As the crew collapsed over their oars, gasping with exhaustion and euphoria combined, Jason looked back at the clashing rocks and saw something that filled his heart with wonder. The great stones were settling into the sea, their bases sinking into the sandy bottom, with the finality of mountains finding their permanent home. Never again would they clash together, for the passage of the Argo had somehow broken the ancient curse that bound them to their violent dance. "Look!" breathed Orpheus, his voice filled with awe as he watched the transformation taking place behind them. "The Symplegades are becoming what they were always meant to be, not barriers to passage, but guardians of the gateway, standing watch over the entrance to the Black Sea, but no longer seeking to prevent the brave from passing through." The waters of the Black Sea stretched before them, darker than the wine they had shared on distant Lemnos, yet somehow inviting rather than forbidding. Here was the realm where legends walked in flesh, and divine blood ran in mortal veins, where heroes might find their greatest triumphs or their most beautiful defeats. Islands dotted the far horizon like scattered pearls on midnight velvet, each one promising new adventures and fresh wonders for those bold enough to seek them out. For 3 days they sailed through waters that seemed charged with magic, passing islands where strange music drifted from hidden groves, and lights danced beneath the waves like fallen stars seeking their way back to heaven. The very air tasted different here, sweeter and more intoxicating, as if mixed with honey and exotic spices from gardens that existed only in dreams. Schools of fish swam alongside the Argo with scales that shimmered in impossible colors, while dolphins leaped from the waves in patterns that seemed almost like writing in some ancient script of joy and celebration. On the fourth morning, they encountered the island of Ares, where the god of war had established a temple served by birds with wings of bronze and feathers sharp as sword blades. These Stymphalian birds attacked without warning, diving from the sky in formations that spoke of military precision learned at their divine master's knee. Their metallic feathers fell like deadly rain upon the Argo's deck, ringing against shield and helmet with sounds like the clash of armies in battle. "Shields up!" roared Heracles, raising his great bronze buckler to deflect the rain of razor-sharp pinions. "Form the tortoise, overlapping shields above and to the sides. Let not a single feather find flesh to pierce." 5. The heroes responded with the speed of long practice, their shields linking together into an impenetrable dome that rang like a great bell under the assault of the bronze-winged attackers. But it was Orpheus who found the key to victory, his lyre singing out melodies so beautiful and harmonious that even the warbirds paused in their assault to listen. His music spoke of peace instead of battle, of the joy of soaring through blue sky rather than diving to attack, of the satisfaction that comes from creating rather than destroying. One by one, the bronze-winged creatures ceased their assault, settling on the Argo's rigging to listen with heads cocked in wonder at sounds they had never heard before. "Music," whispered Jason as the last of the aggressive birds settled into peaceful listening, "truly is the language that speaks to every living soul. Even creatures born from the forge of war can be touched by melodies that remind them of their better nature." Around them, the bronze-winged birds began to add their own voices to Orpheus's lyre, creating harmonies that transformed the air itself into something approaching paradise. When they finally sailed away from the island of Ares, it was with the blessing of the war god himself, who appeared briefly on the shoreline to salute warriors who had won victory through beauty rather than bloodshed. His armor gleamed like captured sunlight, and his voice carried across the water with the authority of one who has seen every form of conflict the world can produce. "Well fought, heroes," he called, his words ringing with genuine admiration. "You have proven that true warriors choose their weapons wisely, and that the greatest victories sometimes come to those who refuse to fight on their enemies' terms. May your wisdom serve you well in the trials that await in Colchis, for you will need every virtue you possess to succeed where so many others have failed." 2 days later, as the sun was setting in glory behind them and painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, the lookout called down from the masthead with news that made every heart race with anticipation. "Land ahead," he cried, his voice carrying clearly through the evening air. A great city rises from the water, with towers that seem to touch the very stars themselves. Colchis appeared on the horizon like a vision from the dreams of gods, a city built from white marble and gold, with gardens that cascaded down terraced hillsides in waterfalls of green and flowering color. The harbor bristled with ships from every corner of the known world, their sails bearing the emblems of kingdoms both familiar and strange. But it was the palace that dominated the scene, rising from the city's heart like a mountain made from precious stones and crowned with towers that caught and reflected the last light of day. As they drew closer, they could see that the very air above the city shimmered with heat that had nothing to do with the sun, the magical radiance that emanates from places where divine power has taken root in mortal soil. Birds with feathers of gold and silver wheeled above the harbor in formations that spelled out words of welcome in scripts too beautiful for earthly eyes to fully comprehend. The water itself seemed alive with phosphorescent trails that followed their ship like liquid stars drawn to the presence of true heroes. "There," said Jason, pointing toward a grove of ancient oak trees that crowned a hill overlooking the city. "In that sacred precinct hangs the Golden Fleece we have come so far to claim. But see how it glows even from this distance, like a piece of the sun itself caught in earthly branches." Phineas spoke truly when he warned us that claiming our prize would not be a simple matter of taking what we desire. The sacred timber of the Argo's prow grew warm beneath his touch, and its voice whispered words that only he could hear. "The greatest test lies ahead, young prince. All that has come before the parting from beautiful Hypsipyle, the defeat of the Harpies, the passage of the clashing rocks, these were but preparation for what awaits in this city of wonders. Trust in your heart, trust in your companions, and remember that love conquered where strength alone might fail." As the Argo glided into the harbor of Colchis, guided by harbor pilots whose boats were carved from single pieces of ivory and whose oars flashed like silver lightning in the gathering dusk, Jason felt destiny settling around him like a cloak woven from starlight and dreams. Behind them lay the wine-dark sea they had crossed through trials that had transformed them from individual heroes into something greater, a brotherhood forged in shared purpose and tempered by shared sacrifice. Ahead lay the court of King Aeetes, the challenges he would surely set, and somewhere in the sacred grove, the Golden Fleece that would either fulfill their quest or become their golden tomb. The sun sank beneath the western horizon like a bronze coin dropped into the sea's treasury, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Colchis. Each point of light seemed to pulse with encouragement, as if the very heavens were watching with approval, as heroes prepared to attempt deeds that would echo through all the ages to come. The air smelled of exotic spices and distant flowers, of magic and mystery, and the kind of possibility that exists only in places where the impossible regularly comes to pass. As they made the Argo fast to the marble quay, Jason looked up at the palace towers where lights were already beginning to twinkle like earthbound stars. Somewhere in those halls waited King Aeetes, son of the sun himself, guardian of the Golden Fleece and keeper of powers that could transform men into gods or reduce heroes to ash with a single word. And somewhere else in that same palace, though Jason did not yet know it, waited Medea, princess of Colchis, sorceress of unsurpassed skill, and the woman whose love would indeed prove mightier than the strength of heroes, just as blind Phineus had prophesied. The greatest adventure was about to begin, and the stars themselves leaned closer to earth to witness how the story would unfold. For in the morning, Jason would walk into the hall of the Sun King and ask for the impossible, beginning the final chapter of a quest that would transform legend into living truth and write names in the eternal scroll of heroic deeds. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine and magic across the harbor, and in the distance, from the sacred grove where the Golden Fleece hung waiting, came the sound of something that might have been singing or might have been the very voice of destiny itself, calling heroes home to their greatest triumph. Dawn came to Colchis like a blessing written in rose and gold upon the eastern sky, painting the marble towers of the palace in shades that seemed to capture the very essence of divine radiance. The Argonauts awakened to the sound of temple bells ringing across the city in harmonies that spoke of ancient rituals and timeless devotions, while exotic birds called to each other from gardens where every flower known to grow in mortal soil bloomed in defiance of season and natural law. The air itself seemed alive with possibility, charged with the kind of magical potential that exists only in places where gods walk among mortals and legends take flesh and blood form. Jason stood at the Argo's prow, watching the city wake beneath the gentle caress of morning light, his heart filled with the mixture of anticipation and trepidation that marks the threshold of great deeds. Today he would enter the palace of King Aeetes, son of Helios, the sun god, and make the request that would either fulfill their quest or seal their doom. The Golden Fleece hung in its sacred grove like a piece of the sun itself caught in earthly branches, so close he could almost feel its radiance warming his face, yet still separated from him by trials that might prove insurmountable. "The others are stirring," observed Orpheus, his lyre already singing soft melodies that seemed to harmonize with the morning chorus of birds and temple bells. "They sleep restlessly, as heroes always do before great deeds, their dreams filled with visions of glory and the kind of beautiful failure that transforms mortal men into eternal legends." His music wove around the awakening camp like invisible silk, soothing anxieties and strengthening hearts for whatever trials the day might bring. One by one, the heroes emerged from their sleeping places, stretching muscles still sore from the passage through the clashing rocks, and breathing in the intoxicating air of this city where magic was as common as morning dew. Heracles tested the edge of his great sword with movements that were more ritual than necessity, while the twins Castor and Pollux stood side by side watching the palace towers catch and reflect the growing light. Atalanta checked her bowstring with the precision of one who knows that preparedness is the difference between triumph and tragedy. Today we learn what King Aeetes will require of us, Jason said, as they gathered around him in a circle that had become as natural as breathing during their long voyage together. Phineus warned us that the Sun King would not surrender his greatest treasure easily, that he would set tasks that seem impossible to complete. But remember, we have already achieved the impossible by reaching this place at all. We have passed through the clashing rocks, tamed the bronze-winged birds of Ares, and sailed across waters that have claimed the lives of heroes greater than ourselves. Whatever trials await, we will face them as we have faced everything else together, as brothers bound by purpose and trust. The palace of King Aeetes rose before them like a mountain carved from precious stones and dreams made solid, its corridors filled with light that seemed to flow from the very walls rather than from torch or lamp. Guards in armor that gleamed like polished mirrors escorted them through halls where frescoes depicted the genealogy of gods and heroes, where fountains played songs more beautiful than mortal music, where the very air sparkled with power that made their skin tingle with divine electricity. In the great throne room, beneath a ceiling painted with all the constellations that wheel through heaven's dome, sat King Aeetes in majesty that befitted the son of the sun himself. His hair was gold that seemed to burn within a fire. His eyes held depths that reflected the passage of centuries, and his voice carried the authority of one who had ruled over the borderland between mortal and divine since the world was young. Yet there was something in his bearing that spoke of suspicion barely held in check, of power maintained through constant vigilance against those who would challenge his supremacy. "So," the Sun King said, his voice filling the vast chamber like the sound of bronze bells ringing in unison. "These are the famous Argonauts we have heard so much about, Jason of Iolcos and his band of heroes, come seeking the Golden Fleece that hangs in my sacred grove. Tell me, young prince, what makes you think you have the right to claim a treasure that has been guarded by my family since the dawn of time itself?" Jason stepped forward, his bearing respectful but unafraid, his voice steady as he made the request that had drawn them across the wine-dark sea. "Your Majesty, I come not as a conqueror seeking to take what is not freely given, but as a suppliant asking for the opportunity to prove my worth through whatever trials you deem appropriate. My uncle Peleus has promised to restore my father's kingdom if I return with the Golden Fleece, and I believe that such a quest, if completed honorably, would demonstrate the kind of nobility that befits a rightful king." The Sun King leaned back in his throne, studying the young hero with eyes that seemed to peer into the very depths of his soul. Around the great hall, courtiers and nobles watched in silence, their faces reflecting the tension that filled the air like incense from some exotic temple. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of scrutiny, Aeetes smiled, but it was the cold smile of a predator who has found prey wandering into perfectly laid trap. "Very well," the king said, his voice carrying false warmth that fooled no one who heard it. "I am not an unreasonable monarch, and I appreciate courage, even when it borders on foolishness. You wish to prove your worth? Then I shall give you the opportunity to do exactly that. Complete the tasks I set before you, and the Golden Fleece shall be yours to take with my blessing. Fail, and your bones will join those of all the other heroes who thought themselves mighty enough to claim what belongs to the children of the sun." A chill ran through the assembled Argonauts, for the king's words carried the weight of prophecy and the finality of divine judgment. Yet Jason's voice remained steady when he replied, "Name your tasks, your majesty, and I will attempt them, trusting in the gods to guide my efforts and in my companions to support me however they may." Aeetes rose from his throne, his form seeming to grow larger and more terrible as golden light began to emanate from his skin like captured sunbeams seeking release. "First," he intoned, his voice echoing through the hall with divine authority, "you must yoke my fire-breathing bulls and force them to plow the field of Ares. These are no ordinary beasts, but creatures born from the forge of Hephaestus himself, with hooves of bronze and breath that burns hotter than molten gold." The king paused, savoring the look of dismay that flickered across some of the heroes' faces before continuing with his impossible demands. "Second, you must sow the furrows with dragon's teeth that will spring up as armed warriors seeking your death. These earth-born soldiers know no fear, feel no pain, and will fight with the fury of those who have nothing to lose because they were never truly alive to begin with. And third," Aeetes concluded, his smile growing wider and crueler with each word, "you must do all of this in a single day, from sunrise to sunset, or forfeit your life and the lives of all your companions. Do you still wish to attempt my little test, young prince of Iolcos?" Jason felt his heart sink like a stone dropped into deep water, for the tasks seemed designed not to test heroism but to ensure death. Yet he had come too far and sacrificed too much to turn back now, and his voice rang clear and strong through the suddenly silent hall. "I accept your challenges, King Aeetes. Tomorrow at sunrise, I will attempt what you have set before me, and may the gods judge whether my cause is worthy of their aid." But as Jason spoke these brave words, he was unaware that high above in a tower window, another figure watched the scene unfolding in the throne room with eyes that burned with interest far more intense than mere curiosity. Princess Medea, daughter of the Sun King and granddaughter of Helios himself, possessed powers of sorcery that made her the equal of any mortal wizard and the superior of most. Her beauty was the kind that legends are written about: hair black as midnight water, eyes that held depths like star-filled sky, and a voice that could charm birds from their trees or demons from their caves. More importantly, Medea possessed something that her father lacked: a heart capable of recognizing true nobility when it appeared before her, even wearing the simple garb of a foreign prince. As she watched Jason accept his impossible tasks with courage unmarred by false bravado, she felt something stir within her soul that she had never experienced before, a yearning that had nothing to do with power or position, and everything to do with the mysterious force that poets call love. That night, as Jason walked alone through the palace gardens, trying to find some way to accomplish the impossible tasks that awaited him, he encountered a figure moving like a shadow through the moonlit pathways between flowering trees. At first, he thought it might be an assassin sent by the king to eliminate a troublesome suppliant, but as the figure drew closer, he saw that it was a woman of such beauty that his breath caught in his throat like a bird suddenly caged. "You are Jason of Iolcos," she said, her voice carrying the music of silver bells and distant streams. "The hero who sailed through the clashing rocks and tamed the bronze-winged birds of Ares. I am Medea, daughter of the king who has sentenced you to die tomorrow unless you can accomplish what no mortal man has ever achieved." Jason inclined his head respectfully, though his heart was racing with emotions he could not name. "Princess, I am honored by your presence, though I confess surprise that you would seek out one whom your father has marked for destruction. Have you come to mock my folly, or perhaps to offer some final comfort to a hero about to meet his doom?" Medea stepped closer, and in the moonlight her beauty seemed almost divine, as if she were some goddess who had taken mortal form to walk among earthbound heroes. "I have come," she said softly, "because I cannot bear to watch courage such as yours be extinguished by my father's pride and jealousy. The tasks he has set are indeed impossible for ordinary men using ordinary means, but I possess knowledge that could transform the impossible into the merely difficult if you are willing to trust in powers beyond the reach of sword and strength." She withdrew from her robes a small clay jar sealed with wax and marked with symbols that seemed to writhe in the shifting moonlight. "This contains a salve made from the blood of Prometheus, he who stole fire from heaven for the benefit of mortals. Anoint your body and your weapons with this preparation, and for one day you will be proof against any flame, no matter how intense. The fire-breathing bulls will be unable to harm you, and you will be able to yoke them as easily as ordinary oxen." Jason stared at the jar with wonder and growing hope, but also with the caution of one who has learned that gifts from strangers, especially gifts from beautiful strangers, often come with prices that are not immediately apparent. "Princess," he said carefully, "your kindness overwhelms me, but I must ask what you would require in return for such invaluable aid. Surely the daughter of King Aeetes does not risk her father's wrath for the sake of a foreign prince without expecting some reciprocal benefit." Medea's cheeks flushed rose-pink in the moonlight, and for a moment she looked less like a powerful sorceress and more like any young woman whose heart has been touched by love for the first time. "What I ask," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle murmur of wind through flowering branches, "is that if you succeed in your tasks and win the Golden Fleece, you will take me with you when you sail from Colchis. I offer you my knowledge, my power, and my loyalty, asking only that you offer me in return a place in your life and a share in your destiny." The magnitude of what she was proposing struck Jason like a physical blow. This princess was offering to betray her own father, abandon her homeland, and cast her lot with foreign heroes whose quest might well end in disaster. Yet, as he looked into her eyes and saw there a love as pure and deep as starlight on still water, he knew that his own heart had already given its answer. "Medea," he said, taking her hands in his and feeling how they trembled with emotion, "if you are willing to risk everything to help me succeed, then I swear by all the gods that I will love and cherish you for as long as life remains in my body. Your place will be at my side, your voice will guide my decisions, and your happiness will be my greatest treasure, worth more to me than any golden fleece." She smiled then, and it was like the sun rising over waters that had known only moonlight, transforming the night garden into a realm of beauty that seemed almost too perfect for the mortal world. "Then take the salve," she said, pressing the jar into his hands, "and when dawn comes, show my father that love allied with courage can accomplish what pride allied with power never could. But remember, the bulls are only the beginning. The dragon's teeth will spawn warriors that cannot be defeated by ordinary means, and I will need to be there to help you when that trial begins." As the first pale light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Jason stood in the field of Ares, his body anointed with the sacred salve that made his skin shine like polished bronze in the growing light. Around the field's perimeter, the people of Colchis had gathered to watch what they assumed would be the final act in another heroic tragedy, while King Aeetes sat upon a portable throne, his face expressing the satisfaction of one who believes he has already witnessed his enemy's defeat. The fire-breathing bulls emerged from their bronze stable like moving mountains of divine wrath, their eyes blazing redder than forge coals, their breath turning the morning air into shimmering waves of heat that would have incinerated any ordinary man. They pawed the earth with hooves that left smoldering craters in the hard-packed soil, and their roaring shook the very foundations of the field like thunder trapped in the throats of titans. But Jason walked toward them without fear, protected by Medea's magical salve and guided by the courage that had carried him across the wine-dark sea to this moment of destiny. When the great beasts charged him with flame pouring from their nostrils in rivers of liquid fire, he stood firm and caught the bronze yoke in his hands, forcing it over their necks with strength that seemed to flow from the very earth itself. The crowd gasped in amazement as the impossible became reality. The fire-breathing bulls, creatures that had never known the touch of mortal hands, submitted to Jason's will and allowed themselves to be harnessed to the adamantine plow. All day he worked, cutting furrows in the enchanted field, while flames licked harmlessly around his protected form, preparing the ground for the second part of his trial. As the sun reached its zenith, Jason began to sow the dragon's teeth in the freshly turned earth, each one gleaming white as pearl and hard as diamond. The very soil seemed to writhe beneath his feet as ancient magic stirred to life, and before the first handful of teeth had settled into their furrows, armed warriors began to sprout from the ground like deadly flowers blooming in fast-forward time. These were the Spartoi, the sown men born from dragons' teeth and animated by the rage of primordial chaos itself. They emerged fully formed and armed, their bronze armor gleaming, their spears sharp as lightning, their eyes burning with the fury of those who exist only to kill and be killed in turn. Within moments, Jason found himself surrounded by a growing army of earthborn warriors, each one pressing closer with weapons raised and murder in their inhuman hearts. But Medea had not forgotten her promise to aid him in this greatest trial. From her hidden vantage point, she called out in the ancient language of sorcery, her voice weaving spells that reached into the very minds of the Spartoi and planted there the seed of an idea that would prove their undoing. "Look," her magic seemed to whisper to each warrior, "see how your brother raises his spear against you. See how he seeks to claim the glory of killing the hero for himself alone." Following Medea's whispered instructions, Jason picked up a large stone and hurled it into the midst of the earthborn army. The rock struck one of the Spartoi on his bronze helmet with a ringing clang, and immediately the warrior turned upon his nearest neighbor, convinced that his fellow had struck the treacherous blow. Spear met spear, shield crashed against shield, and within moments, the entire army of earthborn soldiers was engaged in furious battle against itself, each warrior certain that his brothers were plotting against him. Jason watched in amazement as the Spartoi tore each other apart with the same mechanical efficiency with which they had been created, their bronze weapons ringing like bells in a storm as they fought with the mindless fury of those who know only violence and betrayal. One by one they fell, their forms crumbling back into the earth from which they had sprung, until at last only silence reigned over the field of Ares, and the setting sun painted the scattered armor in shades of gold and crimson. A great roar went up from the watching crowd, for they had witnessed something that would be spoken of for generations to come, a foreign hero accomplishing tasks that had been deemed impossible even by the gods themselves. But King Aeetes sat upon his throne with face dark as thunder clouds, his golden eyes blazing with rage that his carefully planned trap had been turned against itself through means he did not understand. "You have completed the tasks," the Sun King admitted through gritted teeth, his voice carrying the bitter taste of defeat reluctantly acknowledged. "But do not think this makes you worthy to claim the Golden Fleece. That sacred treasure hangs in a grove guarded by a dragon that never sleeps, a serpent so ancient and terrible that even I approach it with caution. If you truly wish to claim what you have come so far to seek, you must face that final guardian and somehow take the fleece from beneath its watchful gaze." That night, as the city celebrated the incredible feats they had witnessed and tales of Jason's triumph spread like wildfire through every tavern and marketplace, the hero himself met again with Medea in the moonlit garden, where love had first bloomed between them like an exotic flower opening to starlight. Her face was radiant with joy at his success, but shadowed with concern for the greater trial that still awaited. "My father speaks truly about the dragon," she said, her voice soft with worry. "It is no ordinary serpent, but a creature older than the city itself, born from the blood of Gaia the Earth Mother, and blessed with eyes that never close in sleep. Its scales are harder than the finest armor, its venom more deadly than the plague itself, and its coils are strong enough to crush mountains into dust." Jason took her hands in his, marveling at how something so delicate could contain such incredible power. "Then we must find a way to overcome it together," he said simply. "For I have learned that the greatest magic is not in potions or spells, but in hearts united by love and purpose. What weapon can we forge from our combined strengths that might prevail against such a monster?" Medea smiled, and in her eyes he saw the reflection of possibilities that existed beyond the reach of ordinary thinking. "Sleep," she whispered, the word carrying power that seemed to make the very air around them drowse with peaceful languor. "The dragon may never sleep naturally, but all things can be touched by magic deep enough and pure enough in its intentions. I know songs that can make the stones themselves dream, potions that can bring rest to the most restless spirits. If we approach the creature together, your courage protecting my vulnerability and my magic enhancing your strength, we might succeed where force alone would certainly fail." They spent the remaining hours before dawn in preparation, Medea brewing compounds whose ingredients included herbs that grew only in moonlight and waters, drawn from springs that had never known the touch of sun. Jason cleaned and sharpened his weapons, not because he expected to use them in battle, but because the ritual of preparation helped focus his mind on the task ahead. As the first pale light began to touch the eastern sky, they made their way through the sleeping city toward the sacred grove where the Golden Fleece waited in its prison of scales and eternal vigilance. The grove of Ares was ancient beyond memory, its massive oak trees rising like pillars supporting the very sky, their branches intertwined so thickly that the interior remained in perpetual twilight, even at noon. The air within was thick with the scent of sanctity and power, myrrh and frankincense, wild roses, and something else that might have been the perfume of divinity itself. Birds fell silent as they approached, and even the morning breeze seemed to hold its breath in the presence of such concentrated magic. At the grove's heart stood a single oak tree, larger than all the rest, its trunk so massive that 20 men holding hands could not have encircled it, its crown lost in shadows that seemed deeper than ordinary darkness. And there, hanging from a low branch like a piece of the sun caught in earthly wood, was the Golden Fleece itself, more beautiful than any treasure they had imagined, pulsing within a light that made the surrounding shadows dance with golden fire. But coiled around the base of the great tree, its scales gleaming like polished emeralds in the fleece's radiance, lay the dragon that had guarded this sacred treasure since the world was young. The creature was enormous beyond belief, its body thick as the trunk of a mighty tree, its length disappearing into the grove's shadows like a serpentine river of scales and ancient malice. Its head was larger than a war horse, with eyes like molten gold that fixed upon the approaching heroes with intelligence older than human civilization. "Now," Medea whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying power that seemed to make the very air around them thicken with drowsy magic. She began to sing not with her voice alone, but with her whole being, pouring into the melody every ounce of love she felt for Jason, every desire for peace and rest that existed in her sorceress heart. The song was wordless but filled with meaning, speaking of quiet streams and moonlit meadows, of the gentle embrace of sleep that comes to all living things when the day's labors are finally complete. The great dragon's golden eyes began to grow heavy, though it fought against the spell with all the strength of its ancient will. Its massive head swayed from side to side like a tree in a gentle wind, and slowly, gradually, the eternal vigilance that had never wavered for 1,000 years began to soften into something approaching rest. The creature's breathing grew deeper and more regular, its scales rippling with the peaceful rhythm of one sinking into the embrace of natural slumber. Jason waited until the dragon's great head settled onto its coils with a sigh that seemed to carry all the weariness of centuries, then moved with careful steps toward the tree where the Golden Fleece hung waiting. Each footfall was placed with infinite care, each movement calculated to disturb neither twig nor fallen leaf that might break the fragile spell. Medea's song was weaving around the sleeping guardian. When his fingers finally closed around the Golden Fleece, Jason felt a shock of power run through him, like lightning channeled through mortal flesh. The treasure was warm to the touch, pulsing with life that seemed to flow from some divine source beyond earthly understanding. It was heavier than he had expected, yet somehow lighter than air itself, as if it existed partially in the mortal world and partially in the realm of the gods. Carefully, reverently, he lifted the fleece from its branch and folded it against his chest, feeling its radiance warm his heart like captured sunlight. The dragon stirred slightly in its magical slumber, but Medea's song continued to hold it in peaceful dreams, and Jason was able to back slowly away from the great tree without disturbing the ancient guardian's rest. Only when they had cleared the grove's boundary did they allow themselves to breathe freely again, and only then did Medea's song finally fade into the morning air like the last notes of a lullaby whispered to a sleeping child. They stood together in the growing daylight, the golden fleece blazing with soft radiance between them, their faces bright with the joy of a quest finally fulfilled and love finally acknowledged. "It is done," Jason whispered, his voice filled with wonder at the magnitude of what they had accomplished together. "The golden fleece is ours, and with it the means to reclaim my father's kingdom and restore justice to the land of my birth. But more than that, we have found each other, and that is a treasure worth more than all the gold in creation." Medea smiled, her beauty enhanced by the fleece's golden glow and the satisfaction of magic well used for noble purpose. "Now we must away to your ship before my father discovers what we have done," she said. "His rage will be terrible when he learns that foreign heroes have succeeded where he intended them to fail, and that his own daughter has aided in what he will surely see as the theft of Colchis's greatest treasure." They ran through the awakening city like lovers fleeing from a disapproving world, their feet light with joy and urgency combined, the golden fleece blazing like a banner of victory clutched tight in Jason's arms. Behind them, the sacred grove lay peaceful in the morning light, its ancient guardian sleeping the first truly restful sleep it had known in 1,000 years. Ahead lay the harbor where the Argo waited to carry them away from this land of wonders toward new adventures and the fulfillment of destinies written in the stars themselves. The Argonauts were already preparing for departure when Jason and Medea reached the Marble Quay, their faces bright with anticipation and relief at seeing their leader return safely with the prize they had all risked so much to claim. Orpheus struck up a song of victory on his lyre, while Heracles and the other heroes cheered with voices that carried across the harbor like the roar of lions greeting the dawn. "Behold," Jason called, holding the golden fleece high so that its radiance touched every face with golden light. "The treasure we sought is ours at last, won not through violence but through courage, allied with love, strength tempered by wisdom, and magic used in service of justice rather than selfish gain. Princess Medea has chosen to cast her lot with ours, bringing to our company gifts that will make us all greater than we were before." As the Argo's sail filled with morning wind and carried them away from the harbor of Colchis, Jason stood in the stern with Medea at his side. watching the city of wonders fade into the distance like a beautiful dream that has served its purpose and transformed into waking reality. The Golden Fleece lay safely stowed in the ship's most secure chest, but its true value had already been realized not in the gold itself, but in the trials that had forged ordinary heroes into legends, strangers into brothers, and two separate hearts into a love that would endure beyond the very stars themselves. Behind them, King Aeetes stood upon his palace walls watching their departure with eyes that blazed with fury and grudging admiration combined. He had been outmaneuvered by heroes whose greatest strength lay not in their individual prowess, but in their unity of purpose and their willingness to trust in powers greater than themselves. His rage at losing the Golden Fleece was tempered by his pride in a daughter who had chosen love over duty, adventure over safety, and the uncertain promise of a shared future over the comfortable certainty of a solitary throne. The voyage home would bring new challenges and adventures, tests of the bonds that had been forged in the crucible of their quest and trials that would determine whether the love between Jason and Medea could survive the pressures of the world beyond Colchis's magical borders. But for now, in this moment of perfect triumph, they sailed toward the horizon with hearts full of joy and the Golden Fleece glowing like a piece of the sun itself in the ship's hold. The sacred timber of the Argo's prow sang songs of victory and homecoming, its voice blending with the music of wind and wave to create harmonies that spoke of quests completed and destinies fulfilled. Above them, dolphins leaped from the wine-dark sea in celebration, their joyous cries echoing across the water like nature's own tribute to heroes who had dared to reach for the impossible and found it well within their grasp. And so ended the greatest quest in the annals of heroic deeds, with the Golden Fleece won not through conquest but through courage, not through strength alone, but through the perfect union of mortal determination and divine magic, not through the efforts of a single champion, but through the combined virtues of heroes who had learned that true greatness comes not from individual glory, but from the bonds that unite noble hearts in common cause. The sun climbed higher in the morning sky, painting their homeward wake in shades of liquid gold, while somewhere in the distance, the coast of Thessaly waited to welcome home heroes who had sailed beyond the edge of the known world and returned with treasures beyond price. Their names would be sung by poets until the end of time, their deeds remembered wherever mortals gathered to hear tales of courage and love triumphant, their example inspiring future generations to reach for dreams that seem impossible until the moment they become gloriously, magnificently real. Thus concludes the tale of Jason and the Argonauts, the quest for the Golden Fleece that became so much more than a simple treasure hunt, a journey of transformation that turned ordinary men into legends, strangers into brothers, and two hearts into one love that would shine like a golden beacon through all the ages yet to come. May their example inspire us all to seek our own golden fleece, whatever form it may take, and to remember that the greatest treasures are often found not in the destination itself, but in the courage we discover within ourselves during the journey to reach it. Sleep now and dream of wine-dark seas and heroes sailing toward horizons where legend and reality dance together in the eternal ballet of mortal dreams and divine possibilities. Rest in peace, knowing that somewhere beyond the sunset, the Argo still sails with her crew of heroes, carrying the Golden Fleece toward harbors of perpetual homecoming and adventures that never truly end.